Let me be direct about what I think is actually being built in Cleveland right now, because when you lay out the specific pieces and the specific logic connecting them, the picture that forms is genuinely different from anything this franchise has been able to articulate about itself in recent memory. I'm not talking about hope. I'm not talking about the kind of optimistic projection that has followed the Browns around for 2 decades and been wrong every time. I'm talking about a coherent blueprint with specific available assets, specific identifiable needs, and a specific sequence of moves that could transform both sides of the ball simultaneously in ways that would redefine what this team actually is. The capital exists. The quarterback situation is trending in a clear direction. The defensive foundation is already in place. And a free agent pass rusher who could change the entire defensive arithmetic of the roster has yet to be signed. Let me walk through all of it carefully, because the details matter and the details are actually compelling. The quarterback foundation first, because everything else is contingent on getting that piece right. Todd Monken has not announced Shedeur Sanders as the starter. He's done something more informative than a public announcement. He structured the operational reality of the competition in ways that communicate organizational direction more reliably than anything said in front of a microphone. Day 1 of the offseason program, Shedeur with the first group. Voluntary veteran minicamp. Shedeur leading the first unit. Watson working with the third. Public description of rep distribution. Explicitly unequal, with the evaluation happening daily through demonstrated performance. The open competition language exists for legitimate external management reasons. You don't publicly close a competition before you've formally closed it without creating organizational and locker room problems that outweigh the benefits. But the operational architecture underneath that language is already organized around a specific conclusion. The building knows. The question is just when the public statement catches up to the internal reality that the practice structure has already been reflecting for weeks. The statistical backdrop of last season deserves serious examination here, because it's the context that makes the draft decisions that follow either make sense or look like misallocation. Cleveland finished last in total QBR. Their quarterbacks faced pressure on 39% of dropbacks, the worst rate in the entire league. Pass rushers were making contact with the quarterback on more than a quarter of all dropback attempts. I want you to actually hold those numbers before moving past them, because they're not just describing poor performance, they're describing a structural environment that was never capable of producing a fair evaluation of any quarterback. When a passer faces that level of constant structural hostility on every possession throughout an entire season, the information you extract is not what he can do, it's what he can survive. Any evaluation conducted inside those conditions tells you more about the environment than it does about the player operating within it. Shedeur showed remarkable things inside that environment. The 2 consecutive divisional wins, the Pro Bowl selection, the processing qualities that an independent tape evaluation later confirmed. What he showed under those conditions is impressive specifically because the conditions were so hostile. But that's different from what optimal development inside a properly constructed environment would have produced. The offseason is the mechanism for building that environment, and the draft is the immediate test of whether the organization understands that distinction and intends to act on it. Picks 6 and 24. Those 2 selections are where organizational commitment either gets backed by real resource allocation or quietly revealed as something less substantive than the internal signals have suggested. The consensus among serious draft evaluators who have analyzed this class carefully doesn't require extensive interpretation to state clearly: left tackle at 6, receiver at 24. In that sequence for specific reasons that make the ordering as important as the positions themselves. Left tackle at 6 is not a preference between reasonable options. It's a necessity derived from where the quality in this draft class is actually concentrated and what happens to teams that miscalculate the timing. The analysts who have done the most rigorous work on this class are explicit about it. The drop-off in tackle quality after the top tier is steep. You cannot sit at 24 and assume that a genuine starting left tackle, the kind who changes the physical conditions of every dropback a quarterback takes, will still be available. That is a position where this specific draft demands early commitment, or you accept meaningful uncertainty at the most foundational piece of offensive infrastructure. If Cleveland has conviction about the quality available at 6, and everything about how the offseason program has been structured suggests they understand the priority, you use the pick, you secure the protection, and you eliminate the gamble of hoping the position resolves itself later. The foundational infrastructure of a young quarterback's developmental environment is not where you take risks you can avoid taking. Then at 24, you address the other structural problem, the one that the pressure numbers capture in one dimension but don't fully describe. The receiving infrastructure around Shedeur does not currently force defensive coordinators to make the pre-snap coverage distribution decisions that open the offense. Jerry Jeudy is a professional receiver with real ability. His route running is genuine. His capacity to create separation at intermediate depths is real and has produced production even in broken team contexts. I'm not dismissing him, but Jeudy doesn't frighten a defensive coordinator vertically. He doesn't force safety alignment choices before the snap that change the geometry of the entire coverage structure and create downstream effects through the rest of the receiving tree. When a defense can commit its secondary resources downhill, protecting the intermediate areas and the short game, without having to honor the threat of getting torched over the top, they can construct coverage environments that make every throw a developing quarterback attempts more contested than it needs to be. That's where young quarterbacks build the bad habits that surface later as ceilings, not through a single dramatic failure, but through thousands of repetitions of being forced to throw into tighter windows than the play design intended, because the coverage doesn't have to respect what the offense can threaten. An offense with a genuine vertical threat operates completely differently. Safeties can't commit downhill before the snap without accepting catastrophic risk on deep routes. Corners have to play with more cushion. The entire coverage distribution shifts, and those shifts open the intermediate and underneath areas that Monken's Baltimore-influenced offensive philosophy is specifically built to exploit. Cleveland needs to draft the receiver at 24 who forces defenses to make that calculation, the player who makes ignoring the deep threat cost more than respecting it. Give Shedeur Sanders that weapon, and the offense becomes fundamentally different in the specific ways that a young quarterback's development most needs. Now let me give the Bosa conversation the serious treatment it deserves, because I think it's been discussed in ways that consistently miss the most important analytical point. The honest assessment of where Joey Bosa is as an individual pass rusher right now is not complicated if you look at it directly. He is not the player he was during his dominant Los Angeles seasons. Age, the cumulative physical wear that accumulates across years of working against elite protection talent at the professional level, and durability concerns that have followed him through recent seasons. All of that shapes what he is in 2026. His time in Buffalo last year showed genuine flashes early before the production faded as the year progressed. That trajectory is real information that deserves acknowledgement rather than dismissal. I'm not arguing that Joey Bosa at this stage of his career is the same force he was at his peak, because that argument is not honest. But here is the piece that keeps getting missed. The role that exists for Joey Bosa in Cleveland does not require him to be what he was at his peak. It requires something fundamentally different, something that his specific current profile is actually well suited to. Myles Garrett is already on this roster. Myles Garrett is still one of the most individually disruptive defenders in professional football. He commands extraordinary protection resources from every offensive coordinator who game plans against Cleveland. Tight end chips, left tackle help positioned before the snap, running backs kept in protection rather than released into routes. That attention is constant and resource-intensive for every offense that faces him, because you cannot leave Garrett in one-on-one situations without accepting catastrophic consequences for your quarterback on a percentage of plays that is too high to live with. The protection attention Garrett generates is not optional for opposing offenses. It is allocated whether they like it or not. Now put a credible, technically sophisticated, experienced pass rusher on the opposite edge. Think through the specific picture facing an opposing offensive coordinator. The best protection resources have already been committed to Garrett, that allocation is non-negotiable. But while all of that protection emphasis is directed at one side of the formation, Joey Bosa is working against whoever is left on the other side without help. And Bosa, with his hand usage, his 15 years of accumulated understanding of how protection schemes work, his technical sophistication in manufacturing pressure within the structure of a play, does not need to be at his physical peak to be highly effective in those matchup conditions. A pass rusher who consistently gets clean or nearly clean one-on-one looks because the protection resources are committed elsewhere doesn't require maximum athletic explosion to create real problems. He needs craft, he needs leverage, he needs the ability to win the technical battle with a tackle who isn't getting help. Bosa has all three of those qualities in abundance, and the specific dynamic that Garrett creates on the opposite edge would consistently deliver him the matchup conditions that make those qualities most effective. The downstream effect on opposing quarterbacks is where this conversation becomes most consequential, and it connects directly to what I think is the most underappreciated dimension of the entire Cleveland rebuild picture. Quarterbacks who process pass pressure from two directions before the snap do not operate the same way as quarterbacks who only have to account for one primary threat. Offensive lines that cannot double both edge rushers make allocation decisions under pressure and accept that one rusher gets a cleaner path. Offensive coordinators who watch protection schemes fail despite genuine preparation because the fundamental problem, two elite or near-elite rushers on opposite edges, is resistant to scheme solutions, have to live with the consequences. That is the defensive identity a Garrett-Bosa pairing would create in Cleveland, and it is the kind of identity that changes game scripts in ways that matter enormously to the person developing on the other side of the ball. That connection between what the defensive identity changes about game scripts and what game scripts mean for quarterback development is the piece I want to develop fully, because it's where the defensive conversation and the Shedeur conversation actually intersect most importantly. Young quarterbacks don't build the deep, durable decision-making confidence that separates good starters from exceptional ones by surviving broken environments. They build it by operating within environments where the team around them makes favorable conditions consistently available, where the defense generates short fields by forcing turnovers and punts, where the running game maintains the balanced offensive identity that prevents defenses from simply committing all their resources to stopping the quarterback on every passing down, where game scripts allow a young passer to operate smart and controlled rather than frantic and desperate. Cleveland last season was the opposite of that environment in almost every measurable dimension. The pressure rate, the contact rate, the limited receiving depth, the defense that couldn't consistently create favorable field position for the offense. That is not an environment that develops quarterbacks. It is an environment that forces quarterbacks to develop compensatory habits that disguise themselves as urgency and resolve, but are actually symptoms of structural inadequacy. The early release born of panic rather than design, the forced throw because waiting is not an option, the playing fast because you have no choice style that looks like competitive fire, but is really just survival. Those habits don't surface as problems immediately. They accumulate quietly and become ceilings. Cleveland's off-season decisions are the opportunity to prevent that outcome rather than hoping exceptional individual talent is sufficient to overcome environmental forces that have historically worked against development. Here is the complete picture assembled. Shedeur Sanders with first-team reps from day one of the off-season program and an 80% completion rate in 11-on-11 reps on day one of voluntary minicamp, demonstrating in actual competitive conditions that the organizational belief in him is grounded in football evidence rather than narrative preference. Todd Monken with the offensive philosophy, the documented methodology, including real-time processing analysis through helmet cameras, the full Baltimore-influenced offensive infrastructure being built around a single quarterback's specific cognitive and physical strengths. Pick 6 securing the left tackle who changes the physical reality of every dropback Shedeur takes. Pick 24 adding the vertical threat who changes the pre-snap coverage geometry every defense has to bring into the building. Myles Garrett as the defensive foundation, already generating the protection attention that makes every other piece of the defense operate more effectively, and Joey Bosa potentially available as the force multiplier on the opposite edge, not the featured centerpiece, but the experienced craftsman whose technical quality turns a very good defensive edge into something that opposing offensive coordinators cannot schematically solve. That is not a franchise still searching for direction. That is an organization assembling a coherent vision with real available assets on both sides of the ball simultaneously. The kind of vision Cleveland has genuinely not been able to describe about itself with this level of specificity in a very long time. Everything requires execution. The draft picks have to land right. The Bosa terms have to work financially. The quarterback situation has to conclude with the organizational clarity the internal signals are already pointing toward. Professional football is not forgiving about declarations made before execution delivers them. But here is where I land honestly when I look at the complete picture. The direction is established, the capital exists, the coaching staff has the vision and the stated operational commitment to deploy it correctly. The quarterback is producing evidence in actual competitive practice conditions that the organizational belief in him reflects real football evaluation. And the defensive piece that would make everything else more effective is still available for the organization to claim. Cleveland has been waiting for this specific convergence of available resources, organizational alignment, coaching quality, and quarterback reality for a very long time. This offseason is the test of whether the organization recognizes fully enough what's in front of it to act with the conviction the moment requires. Based on everything observable right now, I think they do. And if the execution matches the alignment, if the draft goes right and the Bosa conversation reaches terms and the organizational clarity around Shedeur becomes official, the AFC North is going to spend the back half of the 2026 season having a very different conversation about Cleveland than any of us have been accustomed to having.